The massive alien spacecraft materializes above Miami's crowded beach, its sleek hull gleaming in the Florida sun. Panic erupts as beachgoers scatter, screaming and pointing at the sky. The ship belongs to the Bolians, an advanced race known for their blue skin and prominent cranial ridges. As the initial chaos subsides, the ship's main hatch slides open with a hiss. A group of stunningly beautiful Bolian females descends to the beach, their silvery uniforms clinging to their curves. Leading them is Celeste, the expedition's chief xenobiologist, her azure skin shimmering in the sunlight. The alien women line up along the shoreline, their eyes fixed on the human males scattered across the beach. Their gaze is intense, curious, and unmistakably attracted. News helicopters circle overhead, their cameras zooming in on the unprecedented scene unfolding below. Jeffrey Adams, a 28-year-old lifeguard with a chiseled physique, finds himself at the center of the aliens' focus. He stands frozen, unsure whether to flee or stay, as the Bolian women's eyes trace the contours of his muscular body. Celeste takes a step forward, her head tilted in fascination. "Fascinating," she murmurs, her voice carrying a melodic alien lilt. The human male form is impressive. The beach erupts into chaos once more as government officials and military personnel pour onto the scene. General Marcus Stern, a gruff man with a square jaw, barks orders to his troops. "Contain the situation. No one approaches the aliens without authorization." Celeste ignores the commotion, her eyes locked on Jeffrey. She approaches him, her movements graceful and deliberate. "I wish to learn more about human male anatomy and behavior," she states, her voice a mix of scientific curiosity and something more primal. Jeffrey swallows hard, torn between his duty as a lifeguard and the undeniable pull he feels toward this alien beauty. He glances at the approaching military, then back at Celeste. I'm not sure that's a good idea," he stammers, even as his body betrays his words, leaning slightly toward her. General Stern's voice booms through a megaphone. "This beach is now under military control. All civilians must evacuate immediately." The Bolian ship hovers ominously above, its purpose still unknown. World leaders scramble to formulate a response to this unprecedented first contact scenario, one centered around alien fascination with human males. As tensions rise between the human authorities and the Bolian visitors, Jeffrey finds himself at a crossroads. Does he comply with the military's orders, or risk everything to pursue this interstellar connection? The fate of humanity's first alien encounter may rest on his decision. Celeste extends a blue hand toward Jeffrey, her eyes pleading. "Please," she says softly, "help us understand." Jeffrey looks from Celeste to General Stern, then back to the stunning alien before him. He takes a deep breath, knowing his next move could change the course of human history. Jeffrey's heart raced as he locked eyes with Celeste, her azure hand still extended toward him. In that moment, he made a decision that would alter the course of human history. "I'll help you understand," he said, his voice barely audible above the chaos on the beach. As Jeffrey took a step toward Celeste, General Stern's voice boomed through the megaphone. "Adams, stand down immediately!" Ignoring the order, Jeffrey closed the distance between himself and the Bolian xenobiologist. "I'm Jeffrey Adams," he said, his voice steadier now. "I'd like to serve as a liaison between our species." Celeste's eyes widened, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Your offer is most welcome, Jeffrey Adams." Before either could say more, the sound of boots on sand drew closer. General Stern had ordered his troops to apprehend Jeffrey. In a fluid motion, Celeste activated a device on her wrist. A shimmering field of energy enveloped both her and Jeffrey, halting the advancing soldiers in their tracks. "What the—" Jeffrey gasped, reaching out to touch the translucent barrier. Celeste's fingers danced over her wrist device again. "Prepare for transport," she said. A tingling sensation washed over Jeffrey's body, and in the blink of an eye, the chaotic scene on Miami Beach dissolved around them. When his vision cleared, Jeffrey found himself standing in a sleek metallic chamber, unlike anything he'd ever seen. "Welcome aboard our ship, Jeffrey," Celeste said, deactivating the force field. Jeffrey spun in a slow circle, taking in the futuristic surroundings. Curved walls pulsed with soft blue light, and holographic displays flickered in midair. "This is incredible," he breathed. A door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a tall, imposing Bolian male. His deep blue skin was etched with intricate patterns, and his eyes held a wisdom that seemed to span centuries. "I am Captain Zarkon," he announced, his voice deep and resonant. "Your presence here is unexpected, human, but not unwelcome." Jeffrey straightened his posture, acutely aware that he was still wearing nothing but his red lifeguard shorts. "I'm Jeffrey Adams, sir. I've offered to act as a liaison between our species." Zarkon nodded slowly. "A noble gesture. Perhaps you can help us navigate the complexities of human culture and biology. Our mission here is one of scientific inquiry, with a particular focus on human males." As the captain spoke, Jeffrey noticed several female Bolian crew members entering the chamber. Their eyes lingered on him, a mix of curiosity and something more primal in their gazes. Celeste stepped forward. "Captain, if I may, I'd like to begin by explaining some of our customs to Jeffrey. It might help ease any potential misunderstandings." "Proceed," Zarkon agreed, "but be aware that the situation on the surface has escalated. We must tread carefully." As if on cue, a nearby holographic display flickered to life, showing a bird's-eye view of Miami Beach. Military vehicles were pouring onto the sand, and news helicopters circled overhead like vultures. Jeffrey's stomach tightened. "They think you've abducted me, don't they?" Celeste nodded grimly. "It appears so. Come, let me show you around and explain our situation. Perhaps together we can find a way to diffuse this tension." As they left the chamber, Jeffrey couldn't help but notice the lingering looks from the female crew members. Celeste led him through corridors of gleaming metal and pulsing light, explaining Bolian's social structures and technological advancements. "Our society values scientific progress above all else," she explained, "but we face a crisis that threatens our very existence." They entered a medical bay filled with equipment that looked more like abstract sculptures than scientific instruments. Celeste's expression grew somber. "Our male population is declining rapidly due to a genetic disorder we've been unable to cure. We hope that by studying human male biology, we might find a solution." Jeffrey's mind reeled at the implications. "So that's why you're so interested in human men?" Celeste nodded. "Yes. Would you be willing to undergo some non-invasive examinations? The data could be invaluable to our research." Jeffrey hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "If it could help save your species, I'm willing to try." As Celeste began preparing the equipment, Jeffrey couldn't help but notice the gentle grace of her movements, the way her silver uniform accentuated her alien yet undeniably feminine form. He pushed the thoughts aside, reminding himself of the gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, on Earth, the crisis was escalating rapidly. In the United Nations Security Council chamber, heated debates raged between world powers. "We cannot stand idly by while these aliens abduct our citizens," the Chinese representative thundered. The Russian delegate nodded in agreement. "A show of force is necessary to protect our planet's sovereignty." Across the table, the French ambassador raised her hands in a placating gesture. "We must pursue diplomatic channels. A military response could lead to catastrophe." As the debate raged on, a small group of scientists led by Dr. Elena Rodriguez fought to make their voices heard. "Please," Elena pleaded with a group of stern-faced military advisors, "we need to establish communication with the Bolians. This could be an opportunity for unprecedented scientific exchange." Her words fell on deaf ears as the advisors hurried to a meeting with the president, their minds already set on a military solution. Back on the Bolian ship, Jeffrey lay on an examination table as Celeste ran a series of scans. The gentle hum of the equipment and Celeste's soothing voice created an oddly intimate atmosphere. "Your genetic structure is fascinating," Celeste murmured, her eyes fixed on a holographic display of Jeffrey's DNA. Jeffrey turned his head to look at her, struck by the intensity of her gaze. "Celeste," he said softly, "I think I might have an idea about how to prevent a war between our species." Celeste's eyes met his, a spark of hope igniting in their depths. "I'm listening, Jeffrey. What do you propose?" As Jeffrey began to outline his plan, Neither of them noticed Captain Zarkon watching from the doorway, his expression unreadable as he observed the growing connection between the human male and his chief xenobiologist. As Jeffrey finished outlining his plan, Celeste's eyes widened with a mixture of hope and admiration. "This could work," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "We need to present this to Captain Zarkon immediately." They hurried through the ship's corridors, the soft blue glow pulsing around them as they moved. They found the captain in the command center, his tall figure silhouetted against a large holographic display of Earth. "Captain," Celeste began, "Jeffrey has an idea that could diffuse the tensions between our species." Zarkon turned, his piercing gaze settling on Jeffrey. "Proceed, human." Jeffrey took a deep breath and laid out his plan. "We need to show the people of Earth the truth about your mission. A live broadcast directly from this ship, explaining your situation and showing that I'm here voluntarily." The captain's expression remained stoic, but a flicker of interest crossed his eyes. "An intriguing proposal. How do you suggest we implement this?" "We can use the ship's advanced communication systems to override Earth's broadcast networks," Celeste chimed in. "It would allow us to reach billions of viewers simultaneously." Zarkon considered for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. Prepare the broadcast. We must act quickly before the situation escalates further." The next hour was a flurry of activity as the crew prepared for the transmission. Jeffrey found himself in front of a sophisticated camera setup with Celeste by his side. As the countdown began, he felt a mix of nervousness and tenacity. "Transmitting in 3, 2, 1, a Boolean technician announced. Suddenly, Jeffrey's image was being broadcast to every screen on Earth. He saw himself on the holographic display, looking both out of place and oddly at home among the alien technology. "People of Earth," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I'm Jeffrey Adams, and I'm speaking to you from aboard the Boolean spacecraft. I want to assure you that I'm here of my own free will, and that the Booleans mean us no harm." He went on to explain the true nature of the Boolean mission, their genetic crisis, and the potential for human male biology to save their species. As he spoke, Celeste demonstrated some of the non-invasive examinations they had performed, the camera panning over the advanced medical equipment. "What we have here is an opportunity for unprecedented scientific cooperation," Jeffrey continued. "The Booleans need our help, and in return, they're willing to share their advanced technology and knowledge." As the broadcast continued, the reaction on Earth was immediate and varied. In the United Nations Security Council chamber, the heated debates came to an abrupt halt as all eyes turned to the screens displaying Jeffrey's message. General Stern, watching from a military command center, clenched his fists. "Analyze every frame of that video," he barked to his team. "I want to know if there's any sign of coercion or manipulation." Meanwhile, Dr. Elena Rodriguez and her team of scientists watched the broadcast with growing excitement. "This is exactly what we needed," she exclaimed. "We must propose a formal scientific exchange program immediately." Back on the ship, Jeffrey and Celeste concluded the broadcast, both feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. Captain Zarkon approached them, his expression thoughtful. "Your initiative may have just prevented a war, Jeffrey Adams," he said. "I believe it's time we meet with Earth leaders face to face. I want both of you to join the delegation." As word spread of the impending diplomatic meeting, Jeffrey noticed a change in how the female Boolean crew members looked at him. Their gazes lingered longer, filled with a mixture of hope and something more primal. He felt a twinge of discomfort, acutely aware of the weight of expectation now resting on his shoulders. Celeste led Jeffrey to a private chamber to prepare for the upcoming meeting. As the door slid shut behind them, the air seemed to charge with an unspoken tension. Celeste turned to face him, her blue skin shimmering in the soft light. "Jeffrey," she said, her voice low and intense, "what you've done for us. I don't know how to express my gratitude." Before he could respond, she closed the distance between them. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, years of scientific curiosity and pent-up emotion pouring out in a single moment. Jeffrey's mind reeled as he returned the kiss, his hands exploring the alien yet familiar curves of Celeste's body. As they broke apart, both breathing heavily, Jeffrey's thoughts raced. This unexpected intimacy had complicated an already complex situation. He opened his mouth to speak, but Celeste placed a finger on his lips. "We'll figure this out," she whispered. "But right now, we have a delegation to prepare for." As they readied themselves for the descent to Earth, neither of them noticed Captain Zarkon watching from a nearby monitor, his expression unreadable as he observed this new development in human-Bolian relations. The ship began its descent towards the designated meeting point on Earth, the sleek hull glowing as it entered the atmosphere. Inside, Jeffrey stood with a Bolian delegation, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. He glanced at Celeste, their shared secret adding another layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. As they neared the landing site, Jeffrey couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger, more complex journey. The fate of two species now rested, at least in part, on his shoulders. The ship touched down with a gentle thud, and the main hatch began to open, revealing the bright light of Earth and the silhouettes of the waiting human delegation. Jeffrey took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever challenges lay ahead. As he stepped forward with the Bolians, he knew that the real test of his plan was about to begin. As he stepped forward with the Bolians, he knew that the real test of his plan was about to unfold. Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently. Jeffrey stumbled, grabbing onto a nearby console for support. Captain Zarkon's hands flew across the control panel, his face a mask of concentration. "Unexpected atmospheric turbulence," Zarkon announced, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Brace yourselves." The ship bucked and rolled as it descended through Earth's atmosphere. Jeffrey's stomach lurched, his nuchals tightening as he clung to the console. Celeste stood nearby, her blue skin shimmering with a faint sheen of sweat as she worked to stabilize the ship's systems. After several tense moments, Zarkon's expert piloting brought them through the worst of the turbulence. The ship leveled out, gliding smoothly towards their destination, a secluded military base in Nevada. As they approached the landing site, Jeffrey peered out the viewport. The desert landscape stretched out below them, broken only by the gray expanse of the military complex. A heavy security presence surrounded the designated landing area, with armed personnel and vehicles forming a tight perimeter. The ship touched down with a gentle thud. As the main hatch hissed open, Jeffrey blinked in the bright sunlight. He stepped out alongside the Bolian delegation, the dry heat of the Nevada desert, a stark contrast to the ship's cool interior. A group of human officials stood waiting, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. At the forefront was a tall, stern-faced man Jeffrey recognized as General Stern. The general's eyes darted between the Bolians and the ship, his posture rigid and alert. From the crowd of officials, a woman with dark hair and warm eyes stepped forward. "Welcome to Earth," she said, her voice carrying a hint of excitement. "I'm Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the scientific liaison for this meeting." Jeffrey nodded in acknowledgement, then turned to introduce the Bolian delegates. As he did so, he noticed General Stern signaling to his troops. They quickly formed a defensive formation around the visitors, their weapons at the ready. The group began moving towards a large, nondescript building at the center of the complex. As they walked, Jeffrey couldn't shake a feeling of unease. His eyes scanned the area, noticing several maintenance workers moving about the base. Something about their movements seemed off, but he couldn't quite place why. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere was tense. Jeffrey took his place at the center of the table, Celeste to his right and Captain Zarkon to his left. Across from them sat General Stern, Dr. Rodriguez, and a mix of military and scientific personnel. "Let's begin," General Stern said, his voice gruff. "Mr. Adams, please explain the purpose of this visit." Jeffrey took a deep breath and launched into his explanation. He outlined the Bolians' genetic crisis, their need for human male DNA, and the potential for scientific exchange. As he spoke, he could see the human delegates' expressions shift from skepticism to intrigue. Celeste then took over, presenting holographic displays of their research. The room filled with gasps of awe as she demonstrated the compatibility between human and Bolian DNA. "As you can see," Celeste explained, her voice steady and clear, "with the right application of human male genetic material, we could potentially save our species from extinction." Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, her eyes bright with scientific curiosity. "The implications of this are staggering," she said. "The genetic advancements alone could revolutionize medicine on Earth." General Stern, however, remained skeptical. "And what guarantees do we have that this exchange won't be used against us?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. Before anyone could respond, a distant boom shook the building. Dust rained down from the ceiling as alarms began to blare. Jeffrey's lifeguard instincts kicked in immediately. He scanned the room, assessing potential exits and threats. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of movement, figures in maintenance uniforms converging on the building. "General," Jeffrey said urgently, "I think we're under attack." Stern was already on his feet, barking orders into his communicator. "Secure the perimeter. Protect the delegates at all costs." As if on cue, a series of explosions rocked the building. The conference room erupted into chaos. Jeffrey sprang into action, guiding the Bolian delegates towards a reinforced corner of the room. "Stay down and stay together," he shouted over the din. The door burst open, and a group of armed men stormed in. At their lead was a face Jeffrey recognized from news reports. Jack Hawkins, the notorious anti-alien activist. "Death to the alien invaders!" Hawkins roared, raising his weapon. General Stern and his security team engaged the attackers, the room filling with the sound of gunfire and energy weapons. Jeffrey's mind raced, searching for a way to protect the delegates and defuse the situation. In the chaos, he lost sight of Celeste. Panic gripped him as he scanned the room, finally spotting her cornered by two of Hawkins' men. Her personal force field shimmered as it deflected their attacks, but Jeffrey could see the strain on her face. Without hesitation, he sprinted across the room, dodging debris and energy blasts. He tackled one of the attackers, using his beach-honed strength to quickly subdue him. The second attacker turned, swinging his weapon like a club. Jeffrey ducked, feeling the whoosh of air as it passed over his head. Years of lifeguard training kicked in as Jeffrey grappled with the attacker. They crashed into a table, sending equipment clattering to the floor. Jeffrey managed to wrench the weapon away, but not before taking a glancing blow to his side. With both attackers down, Jeffrey turned to Celeste. "Are you all right?" he asked, wincing slightly from his injury. Celeste nodded, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and admiration. "You're hurt," she said, reaching out to examine his side. Before she could tend to his wound, another explosion rocked the building. Through the smoke and debris, Jeffrey saw Hawkins making a break for the exit. "He's going for your ship," Jeffrey realized aloud. Without thinking, he took off in pursuit, ignoring the pain in his side. The chase led them out of the building and across the base. Jeffrey's powerful strides ate up the distance between them, his lifeguard training proving invaluable as he vaulted over obstacles and dodged around corners. As they neared the Bolian ship, Hawkins spun around, his face contorted with rage and fear. "You don't understand," he spat. "They'll destroy us all." Jeffrey slowed his approach, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Jack, listen to me. The Bolians aren't here to harm us. They need our help, and in return they're offering knowledge that could change our world for the better." Hawkins hesitated, his weapon wavering. "How can you be sure?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Because I've seen it," Jeffrey replied, taking a cautious step forward. "I've lived among them, learned from them. They're not so different from us, Jack. They have hopes, fears, dreams, just like humans do." As Jeffrey spoke, he could see the conflict in Hawkins' eyes. The man's grip on his weapon loosened slightly, uncertainty replacing the blind rage. Suddenly, a voice crackled over the base's PA system. It was Dr. Rodriguez. "Attention all personnel. The attack has been neutralized. All hostiles are in custody. Stand down and report to your designated areas." Hawkins's shoulders slumped in defeat. As General Stern and his team approached to apprehend him, Jeffrey couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness. The day's events had shown both the best and worst of humanity. As the dust settled and the immediate danger passed, Jeffrey made his way back to the conference building. He found Celeste waiting for him, her eyes filled with concern. "Jeffrey," she said softly, reaching out to touch his injured side, "let me help you." As Celeste used her advanced medical knowledge to treat his wound, Jeffrey looked around at the assembled humans and Bolians. Despite the chaos and violence, they were talking, sharing information, beginning to bridge the gap between their species. Captain Zarkon approached, his usual stoic expression softened slightly. "It seems, Jeffrey Adams, that your plan has succeeded, though not in the way we anticipated. This crisis has forced both our peoples to confront our fears and prejudices." Jeffrey nodded, wincing slightly as Celeste finished treating his injury. "It's a start," he said, "but we have a long way to go." As human and Bolian delegates gathered to assess the situation and plan their next steps, Jeffrey couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had become a bridge between two worlds, a symbol of what could be achieved through understanding and cooperation. The attack had changed everything, accelerating the process of interspecies relations in ways no one could have predicted. As Jeffrey stood among the mix of humans and Bolians, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in Earth's history, one that would bring challenges and opportunities beyond anything he could have imagined when he first stepped onto that beach in Miami. Florida, the word hung in the air, a promise of new beginnings and full-circle moments. Jeffrey looked out over the assembled group of human and Bolian delegates, his mind still processing the whirlwind of events that had brought them to this point. The attack by Jack Hawkins and his anti-alien extremists had shaken everyone, but it had also galvanized their persistence. General Stern cleared his throat, drawing Jeffrey's attention back to the present. They were gathered in a heavily fortified underground bunker, a far cry from the exposed conference room where chaos had erupted just hours ago. "Mr. Adams," Stern began, his gruff voice softened by a newfound respect. "In light of your actions during the attack and your unique position as a bridge between our species, the President has appointed you as the official human liaison to the Bolian delegation." Jeffrey blinked, momentarily stunned by the weight of responsibility suddenly placed on his shoulders. He felt a gentle touch on his arm and turned to see Celeste, her blue skin shimmering under the harsh fluorescent lights. "You've earned their trust," she said softly, her eyes conveying a mix of pride and something deeper, more personal. Before Jeffrey could respond, Dr. Elena Rodriguez stepped forward, her tablet projecting a holographic display that filled the center of the room. "If I may," she began, her voice brimming with excitement, "I'd like to present our proposal for a joint human-Bolian research initiative." The room fell silent as Dr. Rodriguez outlined her plan. Jeffrey watched the faces around him, noting the mix of curiosity and apprehension. The proposal was ambitious, a secure facility where Bolian and human scientists would work side by side, studying the genetic compatibility between their species. As Dr. Rodriguez concluded her presentation, Captain Zarkon stood, his imposing figure drawing all eyes. "In light of the courage and adaptability shown by humans in the face of adversity, we Bolians wish to offer a gesture of goodwill," he announced. "We are prepared to share certain non-military technologies with Earth." The room erupted into a flurry of excited whispers. Jeffrey could see the gleam of opportunity in the eyes of several human delegates, each no doubt envisioning the advantages such technology could bring to their respective nations. Recognizing the potential for conflict, Jeffrey stepped forward. "If I may suggest," he said, his voice carrying across the room with newfound authority, "we should establish a fair distribution system for any shared technology. This could prevent international disputes and ensure that the benefits are spread equally." General Stern nodded approvingly, and Jeffrey felt a surge of confidence. He was adapting to his new role faster than he'd expected. As the meeting adjourned, Jeffrey found himself pulled aside by Celeste. They slipped into a quiet alcove, away from prying eyes. "You were incredible in there," Celeste said, her fingers intertwining with his. The contact sent a shiver through Jeffrey, a reminder of the growing attraction between them. "I'm just trying to keep up," Jeffrey replied, acutely aware of how close they were standing. "This is all happening so fast." Celeste leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. "Sometimes the most important connections form in the crucible of extraordinary circumstances," she whispered. Their lips met, tentative at first, then with growing passion. Jeffrey marveled at the softness of her skin, the alien yet familiar sensations. As they parted, both slightly breathless, Jeffrey couldn't help but wonder about the implications of their deepening relationship. The moment was interrupted by Dr. Rodriguez, who appeared around the corner with a look of barely held back excitement. "Jeffrey, I need you in the lab," she said, her eyes darting between him and Celeste. "We've detected some interesting changes in your physiology." Jeffrey raised an eyebrow, suddenly aware of a subtle tingling sensation he'd been experiencing. "Changes? What kind of changes?" "That's what we need to find out," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "Your prolonged exposure to Boolean biology and technology might be having unforeseen effects. It could be nothing, or it could be the key to successful human-Boolean integration." As Jeffrey followed Dr. Rodriguez to the lab, his mind raced with possibilities. What did these changes mean for him? For his relationship with Celeste? For the future of human-Boolean relations? In the lab, Jeffrey sat patiently as Dr. Rodriguez ran a battery of tests. Blood samples, tissue scans, and a barrage of questions filled the next few hours. As the final results came in, Dr. Rodriguez's eyes widened. "This is remarkable," she breathed, staring at the holographic display of Jeffrey's cellular structure. "Your DNA is showing signs of adaptive mutation, seemingly in response to Boolean genetic markers. It's as if your body is trying to bridge the gap between our species on its own." Jeffrey stared at the swirling display, trying to comprehend the implications. "Is it dangerous?" he asked. Dr. Rodriguez shook her head. "Not from what we can tell. In fact, it could be incredibly beneficial. We need to study this further, but it might hold the key to solving the Booleans' male population crisis." As Jeffrey absorbed this information, Captain Zarkon entered the lab, his expression grave. "We've received word from our intelligence sources," he announced. "The attack by Jack Hawkins was not an isolated incident. There's a larger underground movement opposed to alien contact, with cells potentially operating globally." The news sent a chill through the room. Jeffrey's mind immediately went to the upcoming public meet-and-greet event they had been planning. "We need to reevaluate our security measures," he said, slipping easily into his new role as liaison. Captain Zarkon nodded. "Agreed, but we cannot let fear dictate our actions. The public event must proceed. It's crucial for building trust and understanding between our peoples." Jeffrey found himself nodding along. Despite the risks, he knew the captain was right. They had come too far to turn back now. As they left the lab to begin preparations for the event, Jeffrey caught sight of his reflection in a polished panel. For a moment, he thought he saw a faint blue tinge to his skin, but when he looked again, it was gone. He shook his head, wondering if it was a trick of the light or a sign of the changes happening within him. With revitalized commitment, Jeffrey set off to find Celeste. They had an event to plan, one that would take them back to the very beach where this incredible journey had begun. As he walked, Jeffrey couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of something monumental, a turning point not just for him and Celeste, but for both their species. The corridors of the base buzzed with activity as humans and Booleans worked side by side, preparing for the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. In the midst of it all, Jeffrey realized that his life had become a bridge between two worlds, and he was only just beginning to understand the true scope of what that meant. As Jeffrey contemplated the implications of his role as a bridge between two worlds, he couldn't have imagined how literal that metaphor would soon become. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Jeffrey found himself at the center of a media frenzy as news of the upcoming public meet-and-greet event on Miami Beach spread across the globe. Reporters clamored for interviews, their questions ranging from the scientific to the sensational. On the eve of the event, Jeffrey sat in Dr. Rodriguez's lab, his arm extended as she drew yet another blood sample. The doctor's brow furrowed as she examined the results on her holographic display. "Jeffrey," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and concern, "the changes in your DNA are accelerating. Your genetic structure is incorporating Boolean elements at an unprecedented rate." Jeffrey felt a flutter of anxiety in his stomach. "What does that mean for me, Doc?" Dr. Rodriguez shook her head. "I'm not entirely sure. This could be the key to solving the Booleans' genetic crisis, but—" She trailed off, her eyes fixed on the swirling DNA model. "But," Jeffrey prompted, "but we don't know how this will affect you long-term. Your body is entering uncharted territory." Before Jeffrey could respond, General Stern burst into the lab, his face grim. "We've got a situation," he announced. "A splinter group from Hawkins's movement has been detected in Miami. They're calling themselves Earth's Guardians, led by a former Navy SEAL named Eric Blackwood. Jeffrey's mind raced. Do we need to cancel the event? Stern shook his head. No, but we're doubling security. We can't let fear dictate our actions. As dawn broke over Miami Beach the next morning, Jeffrey stood aboard the Bolian ship, gazing down at the throngs of people gathered on the sand. The excitement was palpable, even from this height. Celeste appeared at his side, her blue skin shimmering in the early morning light. Are you ready? She asked, taking his hand. Jeffrey nodded, pushing aside his worries about his changing body. Let's make history. They descended from the ship in a beam of light, eliciting gasps and cheers from the crowd. Jeffrey felt a surge of hope as he watched humans and Bolians begin to mingle, their faces alight with curiosity and wonder. As the event progressed, Jeffrey guided groups of humans through their interactions with the Bolian visitors. He couldn't help but smile as he watched a young girl tentatively shake hands with a Bolian scientist, her eyes wide with amazement. Suddenly, a strange sensation rippled through Jeffrey's body. He looked down at his hands, startled to see a faint blue tinge spreading across his skin. Energy seemed to pulse through his veins, making him feel simultaneously invigorated and unsteady. Celeste noticed immediately. Jeffrey, what's happening? Before he could answer, the peaceful scene erupted into chaos. Explosions rocked the beach as Commander Blackwood and his Earth Guardians launched their attack. The air filled with screams and the acrid smell of smoke. Jeffrey watched in horror as an electromagnetic pulse struck the Bolian ship, disabling its defenses. Without thinking, he reached out towards a fallen Bolian's personal shield device. To his shock, the device activated at his touch, projecting a protective barrier around a group of terrified civilians. How did you do that? Celeste shouted over the din of battle. I don't know, Jeffrey replied, his palms sweating. As security forces engaged the attackers, Jeffrey and Celeste worked in tandem to protect the civilians. Jeffrey marveled at Celeste's combat prowess as she used her knowledge of physics to outmaneuver their assailants. Captain Zarkon's voice crackled over Jeffrey's comm device. Jeffrey, we're activating the prototype defense system. We need you to interface with it. Without understanding how he knew, Jeffrey ran to a nearby Bolian console. His hands moved over the controls as if he'd been trained on them for years. Celeste covered him, her movements perfectly synchronized with his own. A wave of energy pulsed out from the ship, sweeping across the beach. The Earth's Guardians dropped to the ground, incapacitated, while the civilians remained unharmed. As the last of the energy dissipated, Jeffrey felt his strength leave him. His vision blurred, and he collapsed onto the sand. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Celeste's face, her eyes wide with fear and concern. Jeffrey drifted in and out of awareness, catching snippets of urgent conversations. He was vaguely aware of being moved, of the hum of advanced medical equipment, of Celeste's hand gripping his own. His DNA, it's still changing. Ma, never seen anything like this. Could be the breakthrough we've been looking for. Jeffrey forced his eyes open, finding himself in the Bolian ship's medical bay. Dr. Rodriguez and a team of Bolian doctors huddled around a holographic display of his DNA, their faces a mix of concern and excitement. Celeste sat by his bedside, her grip on his hand tightening as she noticed him stirring. Jeffrey, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He tried to speak, but no words came. His body felt strange, foreign, as if he were inhabiting someone else's skin. Dr. Rodriguez approached, her eyes wide with wonder. Jeffrey, your genetic structure, it's become a perfect hybrid of human and Bolian DNA. We're not sure what this means for you, or for our species, but Jeffrey's world faded to black once more, the doctor's words echoing in his mind. As he slipped back into unconsciousness, he couldn't help but wonder, was this the dawn of a new era of cooperation between humans and Bolians, or the beginning of something far more complex and potentially dangerous? Potentially dangerous? Jeffrey's last conscious thoughts swirled in a maelstrom of uncertainty as darkness enveloped him. The next 72 hours passed in a haze of disjointed sensations and muffled voices. Jeffrey drifted in and out of consciousness, his body racked with waves of heat and cold, as his genes rewrote themselves. Through the fog, he was vaguely aware of the constant hum of medical equipment and the gentle pressure of Celeste's hand in his own. When Jeffrey finally opened his eyes, the world seemed different, sharper, more vibrant. He blinked, adjusting to the newfound clarity of his vision. "Jeffrey," Celeste's voice, tinged with relief and anxiety, drew his attention. "How do you feel?" He turned to face her, noticing the slight widening of her eyes as she took in his appearance. "I feel different," he said, surprised by the slight resonance in his voice. "What happened?" Dr. Rodriguez approached, her face a mixture of concern and fascination. "Your DNA has undergone a remarkable transformation, Jeffrey. You've become a perfect hybrid of human and Bolian genetics." Jeffrey sat up slowly, feeling a strange new strength coursing through his body. He caught sight of his reflection in a nearby monitor and froze. His skin had taken on a pale blue tint, and faint ridges had begun to form along his forehead. Yet his eyes, still brown and unmistakably human, stared back at him. "Is this permanent?" he asked, touching his face gingerly. Dr. Rodriguez nodded. "As far as we can tell, yes. Your genetic structure has stabilized in this new form." The implications of his transformation hit Jeffrey like a tidal wave. He was no longer fully human, but he wasn't Bolian either. He existed in a liminal space between two species, a living bridge between worlds. As news of Jeffrey's condition spread, the world erupted into chaos. Reporters camped outside the Bolian medical facility, their cameras trained on the entrance day and night. Social media exploded with speculation and debate about the human-Bolian hybrid. Inside, Jeffrey grappled with his new reality. He discovered heightened senses and an intuitive understanding of Bolian technology that both thrilled and terrified him. Celeste remained by his side, her unwavering support an anchor in the storm of change. 1 week after Jeffrey's awakening, alarms blared through the facility. Security feeds showed a group of armed intruders led by Colonel Victor Graves, a known anti-alien extremist, attempting to breach the life support systems. Without thinking, Jeffrey sprang into action. His enhanced reflexes and newfound strength surprised even him as he navigated the facility's corridors with inhuman speed. He reached the life support control room just as Graves and his team were about to sabotage the main console. "Step away from the controls," Jeffrey commanded, his voice resonating with authority. Graves spun around, his eyes widening at the sight of Jeffrey's transformed appearance. "What the hell are you?" "I'm the future," Jeffrey replied, lunging forward with lightning speed. The ensuing fight was brief, but intense. Jeffrey moved with a grace and power he'd never possessed before, easily disarming Graves and his men. As security forces arrived to apprehend the intruders, Jeffrey stood among them, breathing heavily but unharmed. In the aftermath of the attack, General Stern implemented stricter security measures and launched a global crackdown on anti-alien extremist groups. Meanwhile, Dr. Rodriguez made a startling discovery about Jeffrey's unique genetic makeup. "Your hybrid DNA is self-replicating and adaptive," she explained, her eyes alight with excitement. "This could be the key to solving the Bolian male population crisis and even curing human genetic disorders." As Jeffrey absorbed this information, Celeste approached him with a determined look in her eyes. "I want to volunteer for an experiment," she said, "to alter my DNA to be compatible with yours." Jeffrey's heart raced at the implications of her proposal. "Celeste, are you sure? The risks?" She silenced him with a gentle touch. "I'm sure. We're in this together, whatever happens." Their decision sent shockwaves through both human and Bolian communities. As debate raged about the ethics of deliberate genetic hybridization, a delegation of Bolian geneticists arrived on Earth to study Jeffrey's condition. The world watched with suspenseful pause as Jeffrey and Celeste made their first public appearance together. Camera flashes illuminated their intertwined hands, one blue, one a pale blend of human and Bolian tones. They faced the sea of reporters, ready to answer questions about their unprecedented relationship and the future it might herald. As Jeffrey stepped up to the microphone, he felt the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. Whatever came next, he knew that his transformation was just the beginning of a new chapter in human-Bolian relations. The future was unwritten, but for the first time, it held the promise of true unity between their species. Species. The future was unwritten, but for the first time, it held the promise of true unity between their worlds. As Jeffrey and Celeste approached the podium at the United Nations General Assembly, a palpable hush fell over the gathered dignitaries. The chamber, typically filled with the low murmur of diplomatic discussions, now held its collective breath in anticipation. Jeffrey's steps were measured and deliberate, his newly altered physiology still a source of wonder to those around him. His skin, now a pale blue, seemed to shimmer under the harsh lights of the assembly hall. The subtle ridges along his forehead caught shadows, accentuating his unique appearance. Celeste walked beside him, her full Bolian features a stark contrast to Jeffrey's hybrid form. Yet as they stood before the world's leaders, their intertwined hands spoke volumes about their unity and shared purpose. The silence broke as Jeffrey leaned towards the microphone, his voice carrying a new resonance that seemed to captivate both human and Bolian delegates alike. "Distinguished representatives," he began, his words clear and steady, "I stand before you today as living proof of what our two species can achieve together." As Jeffrey spoke, holographic displays flickered to life around the chamber, showcasing the groundbreaking medical advancements derived from his hybrid DNA. Three-dimensional models of complex molecular structures rotated slowly, accompanied by scrolling data that highlighted the potential applications. "My transformation was unexpected," Jeffrey continued, gesturing to his altered appearance. "But it has opened doors we never knew existed. The fusion of human and Bolian genetics has created possibilities that could revolutionize medicine for both our species." He went on to describe the challenges he faced during his genetic metamorphosis, not shying away from the physical and emotional toll it had taken. Yet his words were infused with hope and optimism for the future. As Jeffrey's speech drew to a close, the assembly erupted into applause. The excitement was infectious, spreading through the chamber like wildfire. Even the most skeptical delegates found themselves caught up in the moment, their reservations temporarily set aside in the face of such promising potential. In the wake of Jeffrey's impassioned address, the UN moved swiftly. Within hours, a vote was called to establish a global initiative for human-Bolian integration. The project, dubbed Convergence, passed with an overwhelming majority. As the details of the Convergence project were being ironed out, Celeste prepared for her own genetic alteration. The procedure, conducted under the watchful eyes of both human and Bolian medical teams, was a tense affair. Jeffrey paced outside the operating theater, his newly enhanced senses picking up every beep and whir of the medical equipment inside. When Celeste emerged, the change was subtle but unmistakable. Her blue skin had taken on a slightly paler hue, and faint ridges had begun to form along her forehead. As she opened her eyes, Jeffrey saw that they now held a hint of brown, a perfect blend of their original colors. Their reunion, broadcast globally, became an instant symbol of hope and unity. Millions watched as Jeffrey and Celeste embraced, their altered forms a visual representation of the bridge between their species. In the months that followed, the Convergence project gained momentum at an astonishing pace. Specialized facilities for voluntary genetic modification began to spring up around the world. Miami Beach, the site of first contact, was chosen as the location for the first human-Bolian integrated community. Construction crews worked around the clock, their efforts aided by advanced Bolian technology. The once familiar shoreline transformed rapidly, futuristic structures rising from the sand like gleaming sentinels of a new era. As the coastal metropolis neared completion, it was given a name, Harmony Cove. The choice was symbolic, reflecting the hopes and aspirations of both species for their shared future. On the day of Harmony Cove's inauguration, Jeffrey and Celeste stood hand in hand before a massive crowd. Their marriage, a ceremony that had blended human and Bolian traditions, was still fresh in the public's mind. As they prepared to cut the ribbon, a fleet of Bolian ships appeared in the sky, their sleek forms gliding silently through the atmosphere. The ships brought with them thousands of Bolians, eager to join the integrated community. As they disembarked, the beach came alive with a vibrant mix of blue and human skin tones. Children from both species played together in the sand, their laughter a universal language of joy. Jeffrey watched as a group of young Bolian women stood at the water's edge, openly admiring a game of beach volleyball. He smiled as he saw human players wave invitingly, gesturing for the Bolians to join the game. It was a far cry from the awkward first encounters he had witnessed on this very beach not so long ago. As the sun began to set on Harmony Cove's first day, Jeffrey and Celeste walked along the shoreline. The sky was a canvas of orange and purple, punctuated by the sleek forms of Bolian ships and human aircraft coexisting peacefully. Celeste suddenly stopped, turning to face Jeffrey with a mix of excitement and nervousness in her eyes. "Jeffrey," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I have something to tell you." Jeffrey felt his heart rate quicken, his enhanced sense picking up on the subtle changes in Celeste's body language. "What is it?" he asked, squeezing her hand gently. Celeste took a deep breath, a smile spreading across her face. "I'm pregnant," she revealed. "We're going to have a baby, the first naturally conceived human Bolian hybrid." Jeffrey's mind reeled at the news. As he pulled Celeste into an embrace, he couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. From that first curious glance on a crowded beach to this moment, standing on the threshold of a new chapter in human Bolian relations. As they held each other, watching the diverse crowd enjoying the sunset, Jeffrey realized that their journey was just getting started. The birth of their child would mark yet another milestone in this grand experiment of interspecies harmony. What challenges and triumphs lay ahead, he could only imagine.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.